If ZANU PF was sincere in protecting local industry, this instrument 64 would have been introduced long back, maybe 1980, rather than to wait until they've destroyed the very economy. Because at the moment, if you look at it, you have also alluded to the fact that they are banning some fabrics. We used to have a very vibrant cotton industry, spinning and ginnery industry. David Whitehead was the biggest in SADC, if it's not sub-Saharan Africa, and at the moment is no more. If you go to the ginneries at the moment, it's just a ghost buildings, ghost workshops. So what are they trying to protect? If you look at the cheap commodities that the government is talking about, these are coming directly from China, from looking east. So they are not coming from within our neighboring countries, South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and Mozambique. Those products, they are still relatively expensive compared with the products coming from China. And not only that, if you look at most of the companies operating at the moment in Zimbabwe, they are being run by cabinet ministers, by ZANU PF leadership, including Mugabe himself. So these people are trying to protect their own pockets, their own companies. And these are the same people who do the imports from China. And who also do imports from the Western world. In terms of the control of tariffs for goods coming in the country, that is not new for any government. Any government will have to make a balance between the imports and exports. And currently, Zimbabwe exports to the tune of 5.5 billion, yet only exports 3 billion. So if you look at that, there's a trade deficit of about 2.5 billion. It is not sustainable for any economy. But then if you look at it, why are we a net importer rather than a net exporter? And when did this start? Because in 1980, Zimbabwe was actually self-sufficient. This is why even Julius Nyerere said at one point, Robert Mugabe, you have inherited the jewel of Africa. Don't spoil it, don't destroy it. Okay. Actually, your question is an indication that we are not under sanctions. If we can import, then we are not under sanctions. Yes, because if you are under sanctions, then you find you've got restrictions. You can't actually import goods from various countries. In this case, Mugabe is always trying to give an excuse that Zimbabwe is under sanction from the Western world. Yet, if you look at it, there's a lot of trade inflow from EU to Zimbabwe, and also the imports. Zimbabwe can import any products, any goods from EU. They can as well they are actually also importing from the USA. But I think we have to make it to make a comparison between the era that we are in under ZANU PF and the era that Zimbabwe was under the Smith regime, because there are some economic similarities. In the 1970s up to 1979, Rhodesia was under sanctions. And these sanctions were very much binding. So Rhodesia could only trade with the apartheid South Africa. And here is why I have to draw those parallels, is because this instrument 64 was first introduced by the Smith regime in 1974. Yes. And to protect their industry. Of course, we know when we inherited this, Zimbabwe in 1980, with a very functioning economy. And for your information, the GDP, which is the aggregate of products and services produced within a country, the highest GDP rate ever recorded in Zimbabwe is not after independence. It was actually in 1972, when the country was under sanctions. Severe, pronounced sanctions. Yeah. Yes. Indeed. Yeah. Oh, yes. Indeed. And sometimes sanctions can force you to innovate. Yes. And it's the same sanctions that made Rhodesia what it was, to be self-sufficient in every respect. Because that one was economic sanctions, not the travel ban that we have with the ZANU PF at the moment. So yes, the fact that Robert Mugabe, who is supposed to be well informed about the current status of the economy, would actually come out in the open to address and say we are trying to protect our local industry. We have no local industry to talk about in a country where over 90% people are unemployed. And it basically because of the policies, the government policies themselves that destroyed the economy. The indigenous policy, the indigenization policy that Kasukuwere introduced through, again, all these policies, they are discussed at the back end of the Politburo and then smuggled into parliament, and at the end they become national laws. And the, sorry? Yep. The problem that we have is there is totally no distinction in the eyes of Robert Mugabe and ZANU PF. There is totally no distinction and no separation of powers between a political party that is ruling and the government. And this is the source of our problems. And this is why you find every institution that makes investment decision is partisan and ZANUized. And their decisions, they are based on partisan basis without actually putting into consideration the national interest. This is where we have a problem. And for your information, in terms of, I've alluded that the highest GDP output ever recorded in the history of Zimbabwe was actually during the Smith regime, which was in 1972. And last year we recorded 1.5. Okay, so 22% was in 1972. We actually recorded remarkable GDP growth during the government of national unity. So we, like for example, in 2010, we reached 8.1. It remained the highest so far. And it shows that with a government that is accountable, yes, the economy can be turned around. And this is why during the government of national unity, even the GDP, the growth, the investment started, there was actually an inflow of foreign direct investment. For example, at the moment, the average foreign direct investment in Zimbabwe is about 300 million, 350 million. Compare that with Zambia, 2 billion. Compare that with South Africa, 8-10 billion per year. Even Malawi, about 1.5 billion. But that the figure that about the 350 million that I've been talking about Zimbabwe was up to 2014. 2015 is a different ball. I only know half the half report of the year, the first 6 months, and that was 67 million. Now, if you look at that, the foreign direct investment in Zimbabwe is far less than the diaspora remittance. Indeed, and it has been averaging about 2 billion. So the economy of Zimbabwe is running at the mercy of the diaspora remittance. Yet the government is suspicious about everybody who is outside the country. Yes, indeed. But also, again, if you look at, I know they've also banned fertilizers, agro inputs to protect local manufacturers, as they are saying. Now, if you look at it, since 1980, we didn't ban the agricultural imports in terms of the inputs, fertilizers, seeds, etc. People were free to import. Yes, of course, there will be some duty, like any other product. But this is the period that we actually recorded the highest agricultural imports. And now we've got the land. You'll be surprised to note that during 2010, we recorded 33% of agricultural growth. And that was during the government of national unity. What do you think we recorded last year, 2015? Minus 8%. Yes. So you can see, and it has been going down. So the economy works based on trust. No investor has trust with the ZANU PF government implementing any coherent policies. And the problem with policies of ZANU PF, they've been so much inconsistent. I think you remember that recently Joao was talking about furthering the indigenization bill. Shinamasa was saying we put it on the shelf, right? And you can see the discord coming from various ministries of the same government. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Firstly, let me respond to Choppies. You find that it's not only Choppies. Okay, Choppies is owned by the vice president, Mpoko. And there are many of these companies that are being purportedly being protected by the government, are owned by government ministers. And they will still continue. Don't think that they will be affected with this ban. This ban will affect people like you and me and the vendors we've been talking about. I don't see the government banning big organizations from importing any goods at all. And I think you probably remember that 3 months ago, 4 import license books disappeared from the government, from the Minister of Industry. Okay, and there were a bit of investigations, but no findings were made public. The first thing that we heard was that 4 books had been missing. Import license books, not a license certificate. But this is a corrupt government, and this is exactly what we've always been saying, that the economy will not turn around for as long as we've got this corrupt government in place. And what's that? And it is justified for the vendors to protest, because if you look at this, they do not have the political muscle that the VP Mpoko, for example, have in terms of still continuing to bring goods in the country. They've no jobs, over 90% unemployment, so that is their own source of an income. And it is very insensitive for government to move in and ban those goods. Because at the end of the day, it is the citizens themselves who are suffering. If you look at it, even if they are trying to protect the conglomerates, which is the big organizations, you don't protect the big organizations at the expense of your own people. There have to be a balance in terms of the economics. Yeah. It actually takes back to us to say, wouldn't it be better for the government to control the amount of goods coming in the country through jute import license? They can introduce import license or tariffs. Yes, I mean, that should have been the way to go. If truly the government believes that we have got local companies that have the capacity to produce. Indeed, I mean, if you look at it, most of we have actually talked about David Whitehead, which is now a white elephant. Mashaba mines, they are now white elephants as well. Tano, producing under capacity. Bindura nickel mine, 25% capacity. And so forth. Most of the industries in Zimbabwe, they are operating below capacity. Why? Because of capitalization. They do not have access to cheap finance to replace machinery, to maintain the machinery, let alone to pay workers. So the problem is not about the availability of goods. The problem is finance, capitalization. This is where the problem is. And I'm surprised that the government itself can't read between the lines, because if you look at their own expenditure for 2015, 33.8 million of expenditure went to president's travel. Capital expenditure for primary education, 0. Capital expenditure for secondary education, 0. And then you look at capital expenditure for universities, a paid 17,000. So we have got a priority wrong. Yeah. There you are. There you are. Yeah, it comes in there. Yeah. Yes. There you are. Right. So if you look at we do not have a budget to service infrastructure. This is why if you look at the state of our roads, the state of our railways, the railways are supposed to be moving goods cheaply between cities and between consumers and supply chains, right? That is where the problem is. Why is it the products in Zimbabwe are more expensive than the products in South Africa? Okay? It's yeah, but it's a multifaceted thing, isn't it? It's within an economy. It's not one factor that is affecting it. I've actually also alluded to the fact that the movement of goods itself has to be cheaper, right? Even if the production, the goods are produced cheaply, and if the transportation of the goods between the source of production to the consumer is an expensive exercise in terms of the chain of supply, then again, that add up to the final bill of the final cost of the product. Yes. I yes, I heard that, but I haven't read any official document to that effect. Uh, I'll be very surprised that if that is an official position of the government. But given this government, anything can happen. Nothing will surprise you with the ZANU PF government. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh yes. Supply and demand. Yeah. Supply and demand. I mean, it doesn't matter. Yes, we are using a US dollar. Okay, and we are the only country using US dollar in Africa, right? Which means that our production, unless it's heavily mechanized, okay, they should be balanced. The fact that you're using US dollar does not necessarily mean that you are at a disadvantage, because you can take that as an advantage, because you've got the money to introduce technology in your manufacturing. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh indeed. Yeah. This is what I mean. Even here in UK, right? The why is it that bread in UK, right, is cheaper than bread in Zimbabwe? Yet in UK they use a pound, which has got a higher value compared with the US dollar. But it's because of mass production, mechanization, in technology. Because if there is a mass production, then you distribute the costs, then the value of the product will come down. And if you open the market as well, and I'm very surprised with the way ZANU PF government is going. I suppose I know they are going nowhere, so I must stop being surprised. The the way economies are run, even if we compare with the Western world, like UK and America, for example, which are the giants in terms of the economy, they they strike a balance between free market and an intervention market. So free market, which is an advocate of Friedman, and then government intervention, which is a policy by Keynes, sometimes known as the Keynesian economic theory. Now, the Keynes would advocate to say, if the economy is not growing, then inject money so people can spend. And then Friedman would then argue to say, no, just have a hands free of the economy. Supply and demand would actually stabilize the economy, and the price will be determined by supply and demand. Indeed, I mean, if you look at, for example, here in the UK, at one point the government would intervene in terms of interest rates. So they reduce interest rates so that money becomes cheap. So you can easily borrow from the bank at a cheaper rate. And if you can access money easily and cheaply, it means you've got disposable income. And then money will start circulating in the economy. So that's how they do it. Indeed, that's where the problem is, because oh yeah. And you find these countries like Zimbabwe is the only country where all cabinet ministers are actually CEOs of their own companies, full time, not part time, but full time. And you ask yourself, and these are the very people that actually draft bills and policies that drives the economy. Of course, not only a conflict of interest, but where do they get the time to dedicate to running the affairs of the company, of the government? So the issues that we have go deeper than just an instrument 64. Go deeper than just demonstrating. We need to drill through to say, okay, fine, how did we get here? And how can we dig ourselves out of this hole? To protect themselves. Indeed. So we should have a scenario whereby we have got a free market, okay? What Zimbabwe needs is the ease of doing business by its own people, local investors, regional investors, and international investors. For your information, there is what we call the perception index. So it's the perception of index of ease of doing business with a country. And Zimbabwe is number 157 out of 177. So the higher the number, the more difficult you can do business with that country. Now that 157 out of 177 is the highest in SADC, if not sub-Saharan Africa. Oh yes. Yeah, yes. I mean, like, oh yes, yeah, yes, oh yes, yes, oh yeah, oh yes, yeah, yeah. Apart from the corruption chain that you have to go through, yeah, oh yes, indeed. And look at it. It's not difficult to fix the economy of Zimbabwe. What you need to do is to do just a short survey or research, secondary research. You probably don't need to do much of primary research, just a secondary research, because the information is there in the public domain. From World Bank, IMF, and other agencies, financial agencies, they've got all that data. All you need is access to say, Zimbabwe need, as a government, to say, okay, why is it, foreign investors are not coming to Zimbabwe? The information is there. Even on every country's website, they've got advices, right? You can actually go to UK FCO website. It will tell you what their perception about investing in Zimbabwe. You can go to, if you are targeting America, then you can go to the website for American investment and see what are their perceptions about us. Which areas do we need to improve? Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Indeed. Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is why this talk show that you and me are doing now is very important to the Zimbabweans out there. Not necessarily Zimbabweans alone, but at a global note. And I think from an African perspective, we seem to have similar problems. So the approach in Africa is more or less the same. Yes, we know that other African countries have moved on, and their economies, like Angola, for example, and Mozambique. eh, But if you look at that, it's because they, they've changed the policies to make their countries favorable as a destination for investors, both local, regional, and international. Whereas in Zimbabwe, it's always people like Kasukuere would like to protect their own companies, or would like to protect the Choppies, and Chombo would, Obet Mpofu trying to protect his wealth in Madberland, etc., etc. This is where the problem is. If they are politicians and their role is a civil servants to deliver the services to the people of Zimbabwe, then they must do away with this. Much of the time they are trying to protect their own business, and much of the time they are not even articulating policies of the country. Of course, that's looting, isn't it? That's looting. But at the end of the day, you look at it, Mugabe knows it. He appointed that person. He appointed Chombo. He knows that those people are amassing wealth corruptly, and he has not done anything. I mean, 4 months ago, he acknowledged that 15 billion has gone missing from the coffers. 4 months thereafter, there's no commission of inquiry set up, no police report, no follow-up. So 15 billion just disappeared in a hole. Yeah. Well, yeah, but the fact of the matter is that 15 billion acknowledged by the government went missing. And we know the figure is much higher. You know, if a thief can accept liability to a figure, it means it's much more than that. And he say, yes, I'm a little thief. I only stole 15 billion. Please forgive me. It means that person is stolen much more than that. Yes. So the economy of Zimbabwe is not a simple matter as we see it on the surface. But how to deal with it would start by removing the current government, which has been at the helm of power for the past 36 years, looting, mismanaging the economy. And this is not the government that will instill confidence in the investors to come back in Zimbabwe to invest. Never. Oh, indeed. I mean, there's nothing that they can come up with worth trust, either by locals. This is why Zimbabwe don't trust them anymore. They want them to go. Regionally, they don't trust them. Internationally, that's even worse. The further you go from Zimbabwe, even that's even worse. So their only solution is to find an exit strategy and save their face, save Zimbabwe. Yeah, this is when ZANU PF were celebrating the Herald again. It was all over the Herald, ZBC, ZTV. That now to hell with the West. We have so much billions from China. I did write an article to say if you look at the promised investment, there were major investments, and for countries like China, these were not investments that will be done overnight or in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. The first sign of those investments would start after 2018, and when Mugabe and ZANU PF is already gone. But not only that, they failed to understand that China, they are not sympathetic to ZANU PF. They are very clever investors. They want a return on their money, a return of investment. And they are also advised by the same agents using the perception index that Zimbabwe is 157 out of 177. They know they are not going to get their money. So it was, yes, it was bilateral on paper, but it was conditional as well. Yes, there was about, I think, was it 20 million, which was going to be delivered in form of rice. And I wrote in that article to say, yes, you get the rice, because I mean they are trying to dump their produce somewhere, right? Yeah, but it's and then they still want their 20, and they would have overpriced the rice anyway. So the price, maybe the rice is worth about 10 million, and then they'll say, okay, we'll give you 20 million. You give us 20 million, right? Yeah, but that one has always been a problem. Yeah, they because they what normally happens is yes, government to government they sign the intention to invest, but then those who are going to invest, those are individual investors. Oh yes, of course. All they will do is okay, fine. So the government, all the government will do is to facilitate their nationals to invest in a specific country. So they will give them information because Zimbabwe, ZANU PF would have given the Chinese government information to say, here is the policies that we have, right? Favorable policies for doing business. And then upon the paperwork that they presented the Chinese government would then sign memorandum of understanding. And then that information is given to their Chinese investors to validate. Yes. Then they look at it. They actually will go to Zimbabwe, yeah, to do a fact-finding mission and verify the information that they have, whether that is genuinely information coming from the economics, the economists, other than correct. Yeah. The government doesn't have money. It's not the government that is going to build the dam at Kariba or the power station. Yes, yes, yeah. And sometimes government might give guarantees. That's as far as they can do. To say, okay, now for example, let's say a Chinese businessman want to invest to a Korean mine, for example, and to inject say 15 billion US dollars. The Chinese government might say will guarantee end loss in the event that the Zimbabwean government is not sincere about the business and you lose money. So they can they can guarantee their nationals in that. But again, it's not a foregone conclusion because the investors will do their own homework, right? And do a proper project brief and the documentation. Yes, yeah, indeed. So yes, I mean, it's the problem with ZANU PF is that they were trying to say to justify that they were right to say they were going to look east. But ZANU PF has survived by propaganda since 1980, isn't it? And that is a communist ideology. Big brother is watching you. Yes, correct. Yeah, yes, yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah, as you have summed it up, you find the ZANU PF government has nothing to do with the the sovereignty state. What I mean by that is that they don't think about the citizens. They think about power. So they are trying not to involve the diaspora because they think that all people in the diaspora are anti-government. So they are suspicious. And that if they allow you to vote, then you vote them out of power. Regardless of the fact that they've got power, but they can't use the power. This is where the problem is. As you have said, I mean, many countries are benefiting from a diaspora citizens. For example, China is what it is because of the diaspora. Because there was a time whereby in every country there were Chinese going to universities, tertiary education, vocational education, and then they went back. And then they started to develop China, the powerful China that we know today. Oh, yes. So, and then I also sometimes attend forums, summits, and conferences where I meet presidents of other countries and then organizations of the diaspora for other countries and ministers, cabinet ministers, etc. Philippines is one other country doing very well through their diaspora. And what they do, they've actually developed an interactive map of Philippines, whereby you log in there, you can actually see interactively where opportunities exist for diaspora. So they might say there's a piggery project there, right? And the government will support you. There's manufacturing plant that is required there, right? And the diaspora, they are now speaking with one voice. They've got now very powerful economic organizations. So we are not talking about civic organizations. We're talking about serious investment organizations by diaspora, whereby they actually can build entire towns, put their money together. Mm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a similar project. Sorry. There's a similar project being run by a group of Zambians who are here in UK. So they approached the government. They said, we have put together our investment portfolio. We want land. We don't want to buy land. We want land. So what that portfolio to invest. So they were building an estate, houses, flats, shops, shopping mall, schools. So it's sort of a micro city, self-sufficient. Indeed. So, yeah. Uh, But I think the problem that we have in Zimbabwe is, I mean, everything goes back to the government. The government has been surviving on divide and rule. And this is why even within Zimbabwe ourselves, we, we are not united to face this monster called ZANU PF. There are some people who, oh yes, oh yeah, there are some people who are not even benefiting both socially and economically. But there are some, I mean, yeah, I've been out there meeting people just to solicit, to say, uh, you still believe that ZANU PF after 36 years can turn around the economy for your own public good? But 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 look at it. That's the divide and rule that I was talking about. And all dictators are almost the same. They thrive in poverty. So you make your people poor so that they become reliant on you. And but again, I've always, since I think 2000, when I studied the active politics, I kept on saying to gatherings, to meetings, that ignorance is not a permanent disability. And one day, Zimbabweans will come to understand. Zimbabweans who have the skills, who have the knowledge, and who have the courage to face the monster and demand what is rightful theirs. And we are there now. We've seen it now, it has been, it's no longer just for political parties. Yes. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Before, it was very common that people would be given, just a few beers and they think it's the best government, especially if you are still youth and you don't have dependents. Huh? But as you grow up, you start a family. The same slogan of giving you beer doesn't work anymore. You need to feed your family. You need to send your children to school. You need to find accommodation for your family. Then better lines will be drawn to say, hang on, hang on. Yesterday you were giving me beer, but I can't give beer to my children. I need a job. So this is where we are now. My final advice to the government is that it is an ill-advised gesture. This is not the time to play with the people's lives. If they want really, really to control in terms of controlling goods that are coming in, let them make and introduce policies that are favorable for investment. Let them inject investment. Let them consolidate in terms of capital infrastructure, improve the infrastructure, attract investment. Only when we reach an optimum position where Zimbabwe can produce its its own goods and products, can we then start introducing, and it doesn't have to be wholesomely, introduce certain products to start with, those which maybe do not add much value to people's lives, luxury goods, for example. People like Shangwa who import 500,000 US dollar car, those are luxury cars. So those should be the first one. Unfortunately, it's not the case, because our politicians, they like to move around with the flashy cars, which are most expensive, and they wouldn't want to start with where it has the most. Yes, they are not interested in servicing road infrastructure. They don't manufacture, they just assemble. Yeah. Again, it's running at a lower capacity because of capital injection. It's all about money. I think the only industry that probably is running at capacity is the brewery for beer. Because when people are poor and they are in trouble, you know, they want to drink their, indeed, because it's people would want to drink their stresses away, but indeed, yeah. So, but even mobile phones, it's of late it has been affected, because it operates based on a cash transaction. So in the absence of cash circulation in the country, it has been affected as well, in a way. Oh yeah. Not only that, but they are trying to introduce the computer and cyber bill, crime bill, and what they are going to do is they'll try to enforce that from the service suppliers, not necessarily. So service suppliers will be required to collect information on the usage of phones by, and that whole thing. Yeah, but at the end of the day, investors don't like that. They want a free market. Again, yes, we've got Econet, which is maybe the biggest service provider in terms of mobile phones. But what is the chance that Econet, if cornered, will still continue to provide that service? They might decide to say, we are pulling out. We can't work for the government, because the government want service providers like Econet to be policing their clients. Oh, yes. Yeah. Our listeners can view my videos on YouTube. They can search Pfebve, or they can search Zimbabwe, because we do discuss social, economic, and political issues about Zimbabwe. So they can also access on my blog, which is pfebve.blogspot.co.uk. They can also access the videos on Facebook, and they can also follow us on Twitter at Pfebve. Thank you, Mr. Director Fuma. My pleasure. Okay, thank you.